What happens when you give a man 15 years of your life, your mind, and your dreams only to be thrown away like yesterday's trash? For Eleanor Vance, the answer was brutal. The day her divorce from tech mogul Julian Croft was finalized, she walked out of a marble courthouse with a check for $10,000, a parting gift for her decade and a half of sacrifice. He kept the 9-figure company she helped build, the Silicon Valley mansion she designed, and their entire social circle. She was left with nothing but a name he had tarnished in the press. But they all underestimated her. They didn't know that while Julian was busy celebrating his freedom with his new younger model, Eleanor was quietly building an empire from the ashes of her old life. This isn't just a revenge story. It's the story of how a woman left with nothing signed a $100 million deal that would make the whole world know her name. The air in the Atherton, California mansion always smelled of white lilies and money. It was a scent Eleanor Vance had once associated with success, with their success. Now it was the cloying fragrance of betrayal. For 15 years, she had been the silent partner, the invisible architect behind the meteoric rise of Julian Croft, CEO and founder of the logistics giant OmniLink. She'd met Julian in a Stanford computer science lab. He was the charismatic visionary with the perfect pitch. She was the quiet genius who could write code that sang. Her foundational algorithm, a predictive model for supply chain management, was the seed from which OmniLink grew. She wrote the first 50,000 lines of code herself. Julian named the company, wooed the investors, and graced the covers of Forbes and Wired. "Every great man has a great woman behind him," he'd say at galas, squeezing her hand. Eleanor would smile, the dutiful, supportive wife, while knowing she wasn't behind him. She was the foundation he stood upon. She gave up her own career aspirations to build his. She managed their home, hosted investors, debugged his code in the dead of night, and brainstormed strategy over breakfast. She was OmniLink's unpaid, uncredited chief technology officer, chief strategist, and chief of staff all rolled into one. The cracks appeared slowly, then all at once. Julian's compliments became critiques. "Honey, you should let my team handle the technical stuff now. You've got a great eye for hosting parties." Her strategic suggestions were dismissed in board meetings, only to be repackaged as his own brilliant ideas a week later. He started staying out late, his phone always face down. The scent of lilies was often mixed with a faint, unfamiliar perfume. The end came not with a bang, but with the sterile, quiet delivery of a legal document by a courier. It was a divorce petition, and attached to it was a copy of the prenuptial agreement she'd signed 15 years ago, a document his high-powered lawyer, David Sterling, had drafted. Julian had told her it was a formality, a simple just in case for his early investors. She was 24, in love, and believed him. She now saw the clauses for what they were, a cage designed to lock her out. Her contributions to OmniLink were not formally documented. She was never an employee, never granted shares in her name. The agreement stipulated that in the event of a divorce, she would be entitled to a one-time payment of $10,000 and would forfeit any and all claims to OmniLink or any assets acquired during the marriage. Their final confrontation was in his cavernous minimalist office overlooking the Bay Area. Julian didn't even have the decency to look her in the eye. He was scrolling through his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. $10,000, Julian. After 15 years. Eleanor's voice trembled, but she refused to cry. Not in front of him. "It's what you agreed to, Eleanor," he said, his tone bored. "You should have read the fine print. Business is business." "This wasn't just business. This was our life. My life's work is in that company." He finally looked up, his blue eyes as cold as chips of ice. "Your work. You wrote a little starter code, a college project. My team, my leadership, my vision. That's what made OmniLink a billion-dollar company. You planned dinner parties." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Be grateful I'm not countersuing you for trying to take what's mine. My lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell could bury you." That was when the door opened, and a young woman no older than 23 with flawless skin and a vapid smile walked in. She was wearing a diamond necklace. Eleanor recognized the one Julian had claimed was at the jeweler's for cleaning. "Jules, baby, our reservation at the French Laundry is at 8. The woman Tiffany purred, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. She shot Eleanor a look of pitying dismissal. The humiliation was a physical blow. In that moment, Eleanor Vance, the secret architect of a tech empire, was reduced to a caricature, the discarded older wife. Julian had not just divorced her. He had erased her. The court proceedings were a formality. David Sterling, Julian's lawyer, painted her as a greedy opportunist. Her claims of contributing to OmniLink's core technology were portrayed as the bitter ramblings of a scorned woman. Her friends, the power couples they used to vacation with, suddenly stopped answering her calls. They had chosen their side, the side with the money and the influence. On the final day, the judge banged the gavel. Eleanor walked out into the harsh California sun, the $10,000 check folded in her trembling hand. Julian and Tiffany sped past in his new McLaren, laughing. The click of the mansion's heavy oak door as she left for the last time was the final sound of her old life. She had nothing. No home, no career, no friends, and a legacy that had been stolen and attributed to the man who had just thrown her away. The world saw her as a failure, a woman left with nothing. But in the desolate silence of that moment, a tiny, cold spark of rage began to glow. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Ambition. Her own. The descent was swift and brutal. The $10,000, which sounded like a lot of money to a college student, was a cruel joke in the Bay Area. After paying for a month's deposit on a tiny third-floor walk-up in a rundown part of Oakland and buying a few pieces of second-hand furniture, it was nearly gone. The apartment was a universe away from the Atherton mansion. The air smelled of damp carpets and her neighbor's curry. The constant wail of sirens replaced the gentle hum of the mansion's climate control. Instead of looking out at manicured gardens, her cracked window overlooked a graffiti-scarred brick wall. Every night Eleanor would lie awake on a lumpy mattress, the ghost of her past life taunting her. She'd see Julian's face on TV accepting another award for innovation, talking about the early days and the lonely struggle he endured to build his empire. He never mentioned her name. It was as if she had ceased to exist. Her resume was a ghost too. 15 years of a gaping hole. Homemaker was not a title that impressed tech recruiters. The few interviews she managed to secure were humiliating. "So Mrs. Croft, sorry, Ms. Vance," one young recruiter said, barely looking up from his tablet. "It says here you haven't held a formal position since 2010. What have you been doing to keep your skills current?" How could she explain that she'd been beta testing and refining one of the most complex logistics systems in the world from her living room? How could she say she'd architected a system that was now managing billions of dollars in global assets? It sounded delusional. "I was supporting my husband's venture," she'd reply, the words tasting like ash. The recruiters would offer a polite, dismissive smile and promise to be in touch. They never were. Shame was a constant companion. She sold her designer clothes, the last vestiges of her old life, at a consignment shop for pennies on the dollar. She sold the delicate pearl earrings her grandmother had given her just to make rent. Her diet consisted of instant noodles and cheap coffee. To survive, she took a job at a coffee shop called The Daily Grind. The irony was not lost on her. She who once discussed billion-dollar acquisitions over artisanal espresso was now the one wiping down counters and forcing a smile as she asked, "Would you like whipped cream on that?" The work was humbling and physically exhausting. Her hands, once accustomed to the smooth glide of a keyboard, were now raw from hot water and cleaning chemicals. But it was here, amidst the hiss of the espresso machine and the drone of customer chatter, that the first shift happened. For the first time in 15 years, her survival depended solely on herself. There was no safety net, no shared bank account. Every dollar was earned through her own sweat. One day, a group of tech bros from a local startup came in loudly complaining about their logistics provider. "OmniLink is killing us," one said, a man no older than Julian's new girlfriend. "Their system is rigid. It's powerful, but it's a monolith. You can't customize anything, and their integration fees are criminal. Tell me about it, his friend chimed in. They're a legacy system pretending to be agile. If someone could build a platform that was as powerful but genuinely modular and scalable for smaller businesses, they'd eat OmniLink's lunch. Eleanor froze her hand, hovering over the milk steamer. Modular and scalable. Those were her words. In 2018, she had presented Julian with a detailed proposal for OmniLink 2.0. The core idea was to break down their monolithic architecture into a suite of microservices that clients could pick and choose from a far more flexible and profitable model. Julian had dismissed it. Too complex, he'd said. Why change the formula when it's working? She realized now he hadn't thought it was too complex. He was simply incapable of executing it without her. He had taken her original masterpiece and run it into a creative dead end, milking it for all it was worth while failing to innovate. That night, for the first time in months, Eleanor didn't lie in bed staring at the ceiling. She dug out the ancient, battered laptop she had managed to keep a relic from her college days. It whirred to life with a groan. She opened a simple text editor, her fingers hovering over the keys. They felt clumsy at first, but then the muscle memory kicked in. The familiar rush, the thrill of creation she had suppressed for so long, came flooding back. She wasn't just typing. She was thinking in code, her mind weaving intricate patterns of logic and data. She forgot about the peeling paint on the walls, the sirens outside, the ache in her feet. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, the discarded ex-wife. She was Eleanor Vance, the architect. And she was about to design her masterpiece. She wasn't rebuilding OmniLink 2.0. She was building its successor, its executioner. The project consumed her. Eleanor lived a dual life. By day, she was the quiet barista at the daily grind, politely taking orders and cleaning up spills. By night, her tiny apartment transformed into a war room. The walls became a collage of sticky notes covered in algorithms and architectural diagrams. She subsisted on caffeine and pure, unadulterated focus, often coding for 18 hours straight on her days off. She called the project Logos. The name was deliberate. In Greek philosophy, it meant the principle of order and knowledge. It was everything OmniLink was not. While Julian's company was a rigid brute force system, Logos was designed to be intelligent, adaptive, and elegant. It used a next-generation AI, one she had conceptualized years ago, that didn't just track shipments, it learned from them. It could predict global supply chain disruptions based on weather patterns, political instability, or even social media sentiment. It could dynamically reroute thousands of shipments in real time, optimizing for speed and cost, with an efficiency that made OmniLink look like an abacus. The biggest challenge was resources. Her old laptop could barely handle the compiling. She needed processing power, cloud storage, and secure servers. All of that cost money she didn't have. She sold the last of her valuable possessions, a vintage watch Julian had given her. It felt like severing the final tie to her past. She used the money to buy a refurbished high-performance workstation and pay for a few months of premium cloud services from Amazon Web Services. Every line of code was a reclamation of her identity. This wasn't Julian's project. There was no one to dismiss her ideas or steal her credit. The design was hers. The intellectual property was hers. The triumphs and the bugs were all hers. She felt a sense of ownership that was more thrilling than any luxury the Atherton mansion had ever provided. After 3 months of relentless work, she had a working prototype. It was raw and unpolished, but it was functional. She ran a simulation using publicly available shipping data from the Port of Los Angeles. In the simulation, Logos managed to optimize the logistics of 1,000 virtual containers, saving a theoretical 18% in costs and 30% in time, compared to the industry standard, the standard set by OmniLink. She knew she had something revolutionary, but a prototype in a dingy apartment was a long way from a viable company. She needed funding. She needed a team. She needed to step out of the shadows. This meant creating a pitch deck and approaching venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road, the heart of Silicon Valley's investment scene. It was a world she knew from the periphery, from standing silently by Julian's side at networking events. Now she had to walk into those rooms alone. She put on her best consignment shop blazer, printed her pitch deck at a local library, and started making calls. The first dozen VCs rejected her without even a meeting. Her name, Eleanor Vance, was unknown. When they Googled her, the top results were tabloid articles about Julian Croft's messy divorce, painting her as the jilted wife. Finally, a junior associate at a second-tier firm called InnovateX agreed to a meeting, likely out of morbid curiosity. The meeting was a disaster. The associate, a man named Chad, who looked about 22, spent the entire time checking his phone. "So you built this yourself?" he asked with a condescending drawl, flipping through her deck. "In your apartment?" "Yes, the core architecture is mine, and the AI is a proprietary model I developed." "Right. Look, Ms. Vance, it's a cute idea. Really. But we're looking for founders with a track record. You've been out of the game for, well, forever. And frankly, the logistics space is dominated by your ex-husband, going up against OmniLink. That's a suicide mission." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "My advice? Take this to a small business incubator. Maybe they can give you a grant or something. Thanks for coming in." Eleanor walked out into the Palo Alto sunshine, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Chad's dismissal wasn't just about her resume gap. It was about her identity. To him, she wasn't a founder. She was just Julian Croft's ex-wife. The suicide mission wasn't taking on OmniLink. The suicide mission was believing she could escape Julian's shadow. Defeated, she sat in her car, the useless pitch deck on the passenger seat. The rage from months ago had cooled into a familiar, heavy despair. Maybe they were all right. Maybe she was just a ghost. As she was about to start the engine and drive back to her life of coffee and code, her phone buzzed. It was an email from an old acquaintance, a woman she hadn't spoken to in years from before Julian's rise to fame. The subject line read, "Long time no see." Hope, fragile and unexpected, flickered within her. The email was from Sarah Jenkins. Years ago, before law school had consumed Sarah's life and Julian had consumed Eleanor's, they had been friends, part of the same circle of ambitious young women at Stanford. Sarah was now a partner at a boutique law firm in San Francisco specializing in intellectual property and tech startups. Her firm, Jenkins & Associates, was known for being aggressive, sharp, and fiercely protective of its clients. The email was simple. "Eleanor, I read about the divorce in the trades. What they wrote was garbage. I know what you're capable of. If you ever need a legal shark in your corner, the first consultation is on me. Coffee, not billable hours. Sarah." It was the first olive branch anyone from her old life had extended. Eleanor met Sarah the next day at a small cafe far from the daily grind. Sarah was just as Eleanor remembered: piercingly intelligent eyes, a no-nonsense haircut, and a presence that commanded attention. Eleanor laid it all out: the divorce, the prenup, Julian's erasure of her history, and her new project, Logos. She didn't hold back her fears or her humiliation at the hands of VCs like Chad. Sarah listened intently, her expression hardening as the story unfolded. When Eleanor finished, she took a long sip of her coffee. "First," she said, her voice firm, "we're going to legally fortify you and Logos so heavily that Julian couldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole and a team from Sullivan and Cromwell. We file patents for your AI model, we trademark the name, we incorporate the business. We build a fortress around your IP. That's step one." "I can't afford you, Sarah," Eleanor said quietly. "I know," Sarah replied with a wry smile. "So I'll work for equity. I'm a gambler, Eleanor, and you are the best bet I've seen in a decade. I'm not just going to be your lawyer. I'm going to be your co-founder." For the first time in a year, Eleanor felt the crushing weight on her shoulders lighten. She had an ally. Over the next few weeks, Sarah was a whirlwind of productive energy. She handled all the legal paperwork, turning Logos from a project on a laptop into a legitimate C-Corp. She also took over the fundraising strategy, leveraging her contacts to get Eleanor into rooms that had been previously closed. But the result was the same. The meetings were more polite, the VCs more senior, but the answer was always no. The objections were varied, but orbited the same dark star, Julian Croft. "It's an impressive technical achievement," said a partner at Sequoia Capital, a legendary firm, "but the market optics are complicated. You're a first-time solo founder going directly against your powerful, well-connected ex-husband. Any investment in you would be seen as a declaration of war against OmniLink. Julian has a lot of friends in this valley." "The litigation risk is too high," said another at Andreessen Horowitz. "He'll sue you into oblivion claiming you stole his trade secrets. It doesn't matter if it's true. He can bog you down in legal fees for years until you run out of money. We can't back a company that's guaranteed to be a lawsuit magnet." They were trapped in a catch-22. To get the money to fight Julian, they needed to prove they could survive a fight with Julian. It was a wall of old boys club fear and loyalty. After their 10th rejection, even Eleanor's resolve began to crumble. "Maybe they're right," she said to Sarah, slumped over a table in their small rented office space, a single room they could barely afford. "Maybe he's too big to fight." "No," Sarah said, slamming her laptop shut with a defiant clap. "They're not right. They're just cowards. We're not targeting the cowards anymore. We're going for the king." "What king?" "Marcus Thorne," Sarah said, a glint in her eye. "Head of Ethelred Capital. He's old school, a legend. He's famous for two things: making multi-billion-dollar bets on disruptive tech and absolutely despising arrogant, complacent bullies like Julian Croft. He's our long shot. Our only shot." Getting a meeting with Marcus Thorne was next to impossible. He was notoriously reclusive and only met with founders who came through a trusted personal referral. Sarah spent a week calling in every favor she had ever earned until she finally found a connection. A retired judge she had once clerked for played poker with Thorne. After a tense 48 hours, the meeting was set, but it came with a warning. "Marcus will give you 30 minutes, the message read. "He will know within the first 5 if you're wasting his time, and he has a zero-tolerance policy for bullshit." This was it. They had one chance to convince the most feared and respected investor in Silicon Valley. As they prepared, an anonymous email landed in Eleanor's inbox. It contained a single attachment, a heavily redacted internal OmniLink financial report. The numbers were bad. Far worse than the public filings suggested. Their growth had stalled and their client retention was dropping. Julian was burning through cash to maintain the illusion of dominance. At the bottom of the email was a single unsigned sentence. "He's vulnerable. Don't miss." Someone on the inside of OmniLink wanted Julian to fail. The anonymous email was a double-edged sword. It confirmed Eleanor's suspicion that OmniLink was a giant with feet of clay, but it also meant that her quiet project was no longer a secret. Someone inside Julian's fortress knew about Logos, and if one person knew, it was only a matter of time before Julian himself found out. The meeting with Marcus Thorne was scheduled for a Friday, on the Tuesday before the first attack came. A cease and desist letter arrived from David Sterling, Julian's lawyer. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, thick with accusations of intellectual property theft, violation of a non-disclosure agreement Eleanor never remembered signing, and tortious interference. It demanded she immediately halt all development on Logos and turn over her code for inspection. "It's a bluff," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger as she paced their tiny office. "He has no proof, no specifics. He's fishing. He knows you're up to something, but he doesn't know what. He's trying to scare us into showing our hand." Eleanor felt a cold dread creep up her spine. "He's not just trying to scare us, Sarah. He's warning the Valley. A letter like this gets accidentally leaked to the tech blogs. He's poisoning the well, making sure no one will touch us." She was right. The next morning, a prominent tech blog, TechCrunch, ran a story with the headline, "Julian Croft's ex-wife sued for allegedly stealing OmniLink trade secrets." The article was slanted heavily in Julian's favor, quoting anonymous sources who described Eleanor as unstable and vindictive. Her photo, a grainy, unflattering shot from the divorce proceedings, was splashed across the page. The fallout was immediate. Their shared office space provider informed them that they were terminating their lease due to the potential legal complications. A freelance programmer they had just hired quit, saying he couldn't afford to be associated with a lawsuit. The walls were closing in. "This is his classic move," Eleanor said, her voice hollow. "He doesn't fight you in court. He bankrupts you in the court of public opinion. He isolates you until you have nothing left." But the worst was yet to come. The night before their meeting with Marcus Thorne, Eleanor was running a final diagnostic on the Logos prototype. Suddenly, her screen filled with lines of corrupted code. A malicious script was tearing through her system, deleting files and corrupting her database. It was a sophisticated, brutal cyber attack. Panic seized her. She ripped the Ethernet cable from the wall, but the damage was already done. Months of work were being vaporized before her eyes. Using her backup terminal, she worked frantically, her mind racing faster than it ever had. This wasn't a random hacker. The attack vector, the style of the malware, it was intricate, designed specifically to target the unique architecture of her system. Only someone with an intimate knowledge of her coding style could have designed it. And then she saw it. A digital signature, a tiny, elegant piece of code hidden within the malware's payload. It was like an artist's signature on a painting. She had seen it only once before, years ago, on the original source code for OmniLink. It was Julian's. He hadn't just ordered the attack. He had likely executed parts of it himself, unable to resist the urge to prove he was still the master. It was the ultimate act of arrogant, possessive rage. For 3 agonizing hours, Eleanor fought the digital intrusion. She managed to isolate the malware and save the core of her system, but her demonstration prototype was a wreck. Her presentation for Marcus Thorne, the most important meeting of her life, was in less than 12 hours, and her product was in shambles. "We have to cancel," she told Sarah, her face pale and her hands shaking. "There's no way I can fix this in time. He's won." Sarah knelt in front of her, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Listen to me, Eleanor. This isn't a setback. This is a gift. He just handed us the gun, and his fingerprints are all over it. You are going to go into that meeting tomorrow. You won't show him a perfect demo. You're going to tell him a story. You're going to show him exactly what Julian Croft did to you, to your company last night. You're not just pitching a product anymore. You're pitching a war, and you're going to show Marcus Thorne that you are the one to lead the winning side." Eleanor looked at the corrupted code on her screen, then at the ferocity in Sarah's eyes. The despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, crystalline fury. Julian had overplayed his hand. He thought he was burying her, but he had just given her the one thing she'd been missing: irrefutable proof of his villainy. The offices of Ethelred Capital were a statement in quiet power. Located at the top of a skyscraper in San Francisco's financial district, the rooms were decorated not with the flashy art of new money tech firms, but with antique maps and shelves of leather-bound books. It felt more like a university library than a venture capital firm. Marcus Thorne was a man who fit his surroundings. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't rise when Eleanor and Sarah entered his office. He simply gestured to the 2 chairs opposite his immense oak desk. "You have 30 minutes, he said, his voice a low gravel. "Begin." Eleanor took a deep breath. The plan had changed. She set her laptop on the desk but didn't open it. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice steady, "I came here today to show you a piece of software, a next-generation logistics platform called Logos, that I believe will fundamentally disrupt the multi-trillion-dollar supply chain industry. But I can't show it to you." Thorne raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Then we are done here." "I can't show it to you," Eleanor continued, ignoring his comment, "because last night my system was targeted by a sophisticated cyber attack designed to destroy my company before it was even born. An attack I have traced directly back to Julian Croft, the CEO of OmniLink." She had his attention. She and Sarah then laid out the entire story, not as victims, but as tacticians reporting from a battlefield. They presented the cease and desist letter, the planted news story, and then the masterstroke. Eleanor turned her laptop around and showed him the corrupted code. "This isn't just malware, Mr. Thorne," she explained, her voice gaining strength as she moved into her area of expertise. "This is a work of art. The attack vector exploits a specific vulnerability that would only exist in a system built on the foundational principles I developed 15 years ago. And here," she pointed to a specific string of code, "is the digital signature. It's an algorithm for generating prime numbers written in a very specific, inefficient way. It's useless code, a vanity mark." Julian Croft put an identical signature in the kernel of the original OmniLink platform. He signed his crime. Marcus Thorne leaned forward, studying the screen with an intensity that surprised them both. He was a financier, but he understood the language of power and evidence. "You're making a very serious accusation, Ms. Vance," he said slowly. "I am stating a fact," Eleanor replied. "Julian Croft isn't just a competitor. He is a saboteur who believes he is above the law. He didn't dismiss my ideas 15 years ago because they were bad. He dismissed them because he was incapable of executing them. Logos is the company OmniLink should have become, and it terrifies him." She finally opened her pitch deck. "My product demo is compromised, but my architecture, my patents, and my strategy are not. With a $5 million seed investment, I can not only rebuild and launch Logos within 6 months, I can begin poaching OmniLink's dissatisfied clients, starting with the small and mid-sized businesses he's gouging." She finished. The room was silent. Thorne leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He looked from Eleanor to Sarah, his gaze unreadable. "Your ex-husband is a formidable enemy," he said. "He has the loyalty of the Valley and deeper pockets than God." "He's a bully," Sarah interjected, "and bullies are cowards when you punch them back hard." Thorne was silent for a full minute, which felt like an eternity. Finally, he nodded slowly. "The logistics market is ripe for a change. OmniLink has grown arrogant. Your strategy is sound. Your technology, from what I can infer, is brilliant. But most importantly," he looked directly at Eleanor, "you have the kind of conviction that can't be bought. The kind that is forged in fire." He paused. $5 million is not enough. You're not thinking big enough. A company like this doesn't need a seed round. It needs a war chest. He picked up his phone and pressed a button. "Rebecca, please get David Sterling from Sullivan and Cromwell on the line for me. And after that, get me the CEO of TechCrunch." He looked back at them, a predatory glint in his eye. "We are not just going to fund you. We are going to launch you. Ethelred Capital will lead a Series A round. We will value your company Logos at $100 million. Our investment will be $25 million. We're going to announce it this afternoon right after my lawyers have a very pointed conversation with Mr. Sterling about corporate espionage." Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. Sarah gripped her arm under the table, her knuckles white. $100 million. The number was so vast, so impossible, it didn't seem real. "Julian Croft started a war with you, Ms. Vance," Marcus Thorne said, a rare thin smile gracing his lips. "He just didn't realize he was bringing a knife to a nuclear fight. Welcome to the big leagues." The news hit Silicon Valley like a shockwave. The TechCrunch headline that afternoon was not the one Julian had paid for. Instead, it read, "Ethelred Capital leads $100 million valuation for Logos. New OmniLink competitor. Founded by Eleanor Vance in stunning power play." The article was a masterpiece of controlled demolition. It detailed the valuation and Ethelred's massive investment. It painted Eleanor not as a scorned ex-wife, but as a brilliant, long-sidelined founder, finally claiming her due. And in a carefully worded paragraph attributed to sources close to the deal, it mentioned an aggressive pattern of corporate sabotage and intimidation from OmniLink, which was now the subject of a formal review by Ethelred's powerful legal team. Julian Croft was blindsided. He had expected Eleanor to crawl away in defeat. Instead, she had returned with the financial equivalent of a battleship. The fallout for him was catastrophic. Marcus Thorne was not just any investor. He was a kingmaker. His backing of Eleanor was a definitive statement. Investors in OmniLink started to panic. The anonymous email Eleanor had received was just the tip of the iceberg. The company was a mess. The news of a viable, well-funded competitor, led by the person who had secretly architected their original success, sent their stock into a nosedive. Within a week, OmniLink's share price had fallen by 40%. Julian's board of directors, who had once lauded his aggressive tactics, now saw him as a liability. The whispers of his personal and professional misconduct became a roar. The digital signature Eleanor had found was the smoking gun. Faced with a massive lawsuit from Ethelred Capital and a full-blown shareholder rebellion, the board did the unthinkable. They forced Julian Croft to resign from the company he had founded. He was ousted in a short, brutal press release. His golden boy image was shattered overnight. Tiffany, his girlfriend, left him weeks later, her taste for luxury not extending to public disgrace. Julian Croft, the man who had everything, found himself isolated and toxic, a pariah in the valley he once ruled. He had tried to erase Eleanor, and in the end had only succeeded in erasing himself. Meanwhile, Eleanor's world exploded into a whirlwind of positive action. With Ethelred's funding and Marcus Thorne's mentorship, Logos went from a one-woman operation to a thriving startup. They hired the best engineers, many of whom were eager to leave the sinking ship at OmniLink. They moved into a sleek new office in San Francisco, a space filled with light and collaborative energy. Eleanor was no longer just a coder. She was a CEO. She was featured in Forbes, not as a wife, but as the visionary on the cover. The story of her rise from the ashes became a legend in the valley, a cautionary tale for the arrogant and an inspiration for the underestimated. She never saw Julian again. She heard he had sold off most of his remaining OmniLink stock at a loss and moved to Monaco, living a life of quiet, opulent exile. She felt nothing about it, not pity, not triumph, just a distant sense of closure. Her focus was not on the past she had survived, but on the future she was building. One evening, about a year after the deal, she stood on the balcony of her new office looking out at the glittering lights of the city. Sarah stood beside her holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To Logos," Sarah said, raising her glass. "To Logos," Eleanor echoed. The champagne was crisp and cold. The air smelled not of lilies or damp carpets, but of the fresh, salty breeze from the bay. It was the scent of freedom. She hadn't just gotten her revenge. She had gotten something far better: her name, her legacy, and her life back. She had been left with nothing, and from that nothing she had built an empire. Her own. The $100 million valuation wasn't an ending. It was the starting pistol for a race Eleanor had never trained to run. The quiet solitude of late-night coding was replaced by the relentless clamor of a rapidly scaling company. Her calendar, once empty, was now a color-coded tapestry of back-to-back meetings, engineering sprints, marketing strategy sessions, HR mediations, and endless investor updates. The thrill of victory had faded into the grinding reality of leadership, and Eleanor quickly learned that building a company was one thing. Leading it was another entirely. The tech world, which now celebrated her as a feminist icon, was also watching her with hawk-like scrutiny. She was no longer the underdog. She was the incumbent in waiting, and with that came immense pressure. Every decision was analyzed, every hire was debated on tech forums, and every quarterly projection was a promise she had to keep to Marcus Thorne and her board. The ghost of Julian wasn't in her rearview mirror anymore. It was in the whispers in every boardroom she entered. Was she just a revenge story, or was she a real CEO? Her first major test came in the form of the Global Transport Alliance GTA, a colossal family-owned shipping conglomerate from Germany. Landing GTA as a client would be a coup, and undeniable signal to the market that Logos was not just a nimble startup, but a true enterprise solution, capable of handling the biggest players on the planet. The CEO of GTA was a man named Alastair Finch, a formidable patriarch in his 70s, with a handshake that could crush granite and an open disdain for Silicon Valley's move fast and break things ethos. In their first meeting, Finch didn't hide his skepticism. "Your story is remarkable, Ms. Vance," he said, his German accent precise and cutting. "A true David and Goliath narrative. However, we are not in the business of funding narratives. My company has over 300,000 shipping containers in transit at any given moment. We require flawless execution, not an inspiring backstory." For weeks, Finch's team put Eleanor's engineers through hell, demanding security audits, data stress tests, and endless customizations. But the final hurdle was Alistair Finch himself. He proposed a final audacious test, a live fire exercise. For 24 hours, Logos would shadow GTA's entire global operation, processing real-time data from their ships, trucks, and warehouses. If Logos could identify and execute cost-saving optimizations without a single error, they would get the contract. If the system hiccuped even once, the deal was off. Her own executive team was divided. "It's too risky," her COO argued. "Our system is robust, but not for that scale, not live. A single bug could corrupt their data and make us look like amateurs. We should push for a phased rollout." That night, Eleanor sat alone in her glass-walled office, the city lights twinkling below. The COO's words echoed in her ears, mingling with the phantom voice of Julian from years past. "Let my team handle the technical stuff now. You're in over your head." Doubt, cold and familiar, crept in. Was she just a coder who had gotten lucky? Was she about to fly her company directly into the sun? She walked out of her office and onto the main engineering floor. Most of her team was still there, exhausted, but determined, their faces illuminated by glowing screens of code. She saw the same fire in their eyes that had burned in hers in that tiny Oakland apartment. They believed in Logos. More importantly, they believed in her. That was the moment she understood the difference between being a coder and being a leader. A leader absorbed the fear and radiated confidence. She grabbed a headset and a keyboard, pulling up a chair beside her lead architect. "All right," she announced to the room, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "Let's run the pre-simulation one more time. I want to personally review the predictive disruption module. And someone get me a coffee. It's going to be a long night." She didn't just delegate. She embedded herself with her team, her fingers flying across the keyboard, debugging code and optimizing algorithms with a speed that left her young engineers in awe. She wasn't just their CEO, she was one of them in the digital trenches. The 24-hour test began. The data flooded in a torrent of logistics information from 6 continents. The Logos servers hummed. On the main screen, a map of the world lit up with the movements of the GTA fleet. Eleanor and her team watched, holding their breath. An hour in, an alert flashed. A dock workers' strike was unexpectedly escalating in Rotterdam, one of the world's busiest ports. GTA's existing system hadn't even registered it yet. Before anyone in the room could react, Logos's AI kicked in. It automatically rerouted 17 container ships destined for Rotterdam to Antwerp and Bremerhaven, recalculated the new ground transportation logistics, and updated the inventory manifests, all in the span of 90 seconds. It had not only averted a multi-million-dollar delay, but had also saved the company from a logistical nightmare. The rest of the 24 hours were flawless. The next morning, Alistair Finch called her personally. There was a new tone in his voice, one of profound respect. "Ms. Vance," he said simply, "the numbers my team is showing me are impossible. You have not just built a better system. You have built the future. The contract is yours." Eleanor hung up the phone, a slow smile spreading across her face. She looked at her reflection in the glass wall. The woman looking back was not Julian Croft's ex-wife. She was not the barista from the Daily Grind. She was the CEO and founder of Logos, a woman who had faced down her own doubts and earned her crown not through a story, but through steel. The victory felt more profound than the $100 million deal. It was real. It was hers. And it was just the beginning. With the GTA contract secured, Logos became the undisputed titan of the industry. OmniLink, under its new uninspired leadership, was hemorrhaging clients. and was eventually acquired by a larger, older tech firm for a fraction of its former value, its name relegated to a footnote in the history of logistics. Eleanor had won so completely that Julian Croft was no longer even a relevant ghost. He was to her a forgotten memory. Until the day an email landed in her personal inbox. The sender was a name she hadn't seen in years, Julian Croft. The subject line was chillingly simple: for your own good. Against Sarah's strenuous objections, "Don't engage Eleanor, nothing good can come of this." She opened it. The message was short and devoid of emotion. He claimed to have information about a hostile takeover being plotted by a rival VC firm. He said they were exploiting a vulnerability in her company's capital structure. He wanted to meet to give her the details. "Consider it a final piece of advice," he wrote. "For the sake of the company we both in our own ways began." Eleanor knew it was a lie. A corporate takeover would have been detected by Marcus Thorne's army of analysts. This was a trap, but not a corporate one. It was personal. The old Eleanor would have deleted the email paralyzed by fear, but she was no longer the old Eleanor. She knew that to truly be free of him, she couldn't just ignore his ghost. She had to exorcise it. She agreed to meet, but on her terms. Not in a dark bar or a private office, but in the sun-drenched, bustling atrium of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art on a Saturday afternoon. It was a place of light, transparency, and beauty. Everything their marriage had not been. He was waiting for her near a Calder Mobile. The years had not been kind. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a tense, wired energy. He was thinner. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a long time. "Eleanor," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You look well. Success agrees with you." "What do you want, Julian?" she asked, her tone neutral, devoid of the anger or hurt he was likely expecting. He launched into his fabricated story about a corporate plot using jargon and names meant to intimidate her. He was trying to reestablish the old dynamic, him as the master strategist, her as the naive woman who needed his guidance. Eleanor let him finish. When he was done, she didn't even address his lies. "That's not why you're here," she said calmly. "There is no takeover plot. You just wanted to see if you could still get me in a room. You wanted to see if you still had any power over me." His mask of civility cracked. His face twisted into a sneer. "Power? I don't need power over you. I'm trying to help you. You have no idea what it's like running a company this size. The betrayals, the snakes in the grass. You're still just a coder. You're going to lose it all." "The difference between you and me, Julian," she said, her voice soft but unbreakable, "is that you built a company to prove you were a king. Your employees were just subjects. Your ideas were just tools for your ego. You surrounded yourself with sycophants and yes-men, and that's why you failed. You couldn't innovate because your pride was more important than the product." She took a step closer. "I build things to solve problems. I surround myself with people who are smarter than me, who challenge me every single day. My power doesn't come from my title. It comes from their trust, something you never had and could never understand." He was speechless. He had expected tears or a shouting match. He was prepared for anger. He was not prepared for this calm, surgical dismantling of his entire identity. He had one last card to play, the cruelest one. "You've become me, you know," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You're ruthless. You destroyed my company. You took everything. Don't pretend you're a saint." Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time she felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound sense of detachment. He was a relic, a black and white photograph from a forgotten album. "I didn't destroy you, Julian," she said, delivering the final liberating truth. "You just became irrelevant. Your company failed because it was built on a lie and the future left it behind. I didn't take anything from you. I simply took back what was mine." She turned and walked away. "Eleanor, wait." He called after her, his voice cracking with a desperation that echoed through the vast open space. But she didn't wait. She didn't look back. She walked out of the museum and into the brilliant afternoon sun, leaving the ghost of her past to fade among the sculptures. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her lead engineer with a picture of their team celebrating the successful launch of the Logos 2.0 platform. She smiled and typed a reply, her steps light and sure on the pavement. She was no longer running from a past he had defined. She was walking toward a future she was building one line of code, one contract, one confident step at a time. Eleanor Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest achievements. She was stripped of her past, her wealth, and her dignity, but no one could take away her intellect, her resilience, and her will to rebuild. Her journey from a run-down Oakland apartment to a $100 million boardroom wasn't just about getting even, it was about getting whole. It's a testament to the fact that your worth is never defined by who you leave, but by what you build next. What did you find most inspiring about Eleanor's fight? Have you ever had a moment in your life where you had to start over from scratch? Share your thoughts and your own stories of resilience in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss our next story of incredible real-life triumphs against all odds. Thank you for listening. The lock clicked shut behind her, a sound as final as a coffin lid. Rain slicked the polished marble steps of the New York City brownstone, making them treacherous. He didn't even give her a coat. Julian Thorne, the man she had loved, the man who had molded her and then broken her, stood silhouetted in the doorway, a figure of pure, cold indifference. He had cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart shattered into a million pieces, calling her his greatest failed project. But they never imagined that the woman they threw away would return not as a beggar, but as the bride of a man whose name made emperors tremble. How does a forgotten wife left with nothing come to stand at the pinnacle of power? This is the story of Amelia Thorne's fall and the spectacular rise of Amelia Sterling. The late September air in Manhattan had a bite to it, a promise of the brutal winter to come. For Amelia, the cold was already bone deep. She stood on the sidewalk of East 72nd Street, the fine wool of her dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin, now damp with a mixture of rain and tears. The door to her life, the life she'd known for 5 years, had been slammed and locked. Inside was every memory, every piece of her identity, every book she'd ever loved. Outside was nothing. Julian Thorne hadn't just divorced her, he had surgically excised her from his world. He was a rising star in private equity, a disciple of the Blackstone School of Corporate Rating, and he believed in ruthless efficiency. Amelia, the quiet art history graduate from a state school in Ohio, had been his passion project. He'd found her working at a small gallery, loved her raw intelligence, and decided to polish her. He taught her which fork to use, which designers to wear, and which opinions to have. In return, she had loved him with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. She had believed his critiques were for her own good, his controlling nature a form of protection. The end came swiftly. Julian was closing a deal that would make him a partner at his firm, a deal with a powerful old-money family from Boston. They had a daughter perfect and pedigreed with a trust fund that could swallow Julian's net worth whole. Amelia, with her humble origins and quiet passions, was suddenly a liability. "You just don't fit anymore, Amelia." He'd said that morning, his voice devoid of emotion as he sipped his single-origin espresso. "We're moving in different circles now. I need a partner, not a student. You were a wonderful project, but the project is over." She had tried to argue, to remind him of their vows, of the nights she'd stayed up helping him with presentations, of the genuine love she felt for him. He had simply laughed, a short barking sound. "Love, Amelia, this was an arrangement. You got a taste of a life you could never have dreamed of, and I had a beautiful, adoring woman on my arm. The arrangement is terminated." His mother, Veronica Thorne, a woman who looked as if she were carved from ice, had overseen the eviction. She'd walked through the house, pointing at items with a manicured finger. That's a Thorne family heirloom. That was a gift to my son." "Her personal effects are negligible," I assume she'd said to the housekeeper, not even looking at Amelia. They had allowed her one small box. A few books, a framed photo of her late parents, and her grandmother's locket. As she stood on the street clutching the soggy cardboard, Julian's parting words echoed in her ears. "Go back to whatever provincial life you crawled out of. It's where you belong." She had nowhere to go. Her parents were gone, and her only living relative was an aunt in a nursing home. The friends she'd made in New York were Julian's friends, their loyalty bought and paid for. Her bank account, a joint one, had been frozen. He'd left her with $87 in her purse. A taxi hissed past, splashing grimy water onto her ankles. Humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling sickness in her stomach. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was erased. Julian hadn't just taken her home, he had taken her name, her confidence, her future. As she huddled under the awning of a closed bakery, shivering, she made a silent, desperate vow. She didn't know how, but she would not be broken. She would survive. And one day Julian Thorne would remember her name. The first few weeks were a blur of cheap motel rooms paid for in cash, lukewarm coffee, and the constant gnawing fear of the future. Amelia sold the last piece of her old life, a pair of diamond earrings Julian had given her for their first anniversary, for a pittance at a pawn shop. It was enough for a security deposit on a tiny walk-up apartment in Queens, with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. The silence was the hardest part. The brownstone had always been filled with noise. Julian's conference calls, the clatter of the housekeeper, the hum of the city. Here, the only sound was the drip of a leaky faucet and the frantic beating of her own heart. She spent days applying for jobs, her resume feeling like a work of fiction. Personal assistant to Julian Thorne. Household manager. Event coordinator for Thorne social functions. Everything was tied to him. The rejections were polite but firm. No one in that rarefied world wanted Julian Thorne's discarded wife. Desperate, she reached back into her past, to the one place Julian hadn't been able to touch: her education. She found an email address for Dr. Alistair Finch, her old art history professor, a man who had once told her she had a rare and intuitive eye for provenance. She wrote him a carefully worded email, omitting the humiliating details of her divorce, and simply stated she was seeking opportunities in the art world again. To her surprise, he replied within an hour. He remembered her. He mentioned a position he'd heard about, nothing glamorous, he warned. It was a contract role in the archives of the Morgan Library and Museum, specifically for a new acquisition of a lesser-known Renaissance benefactor's correspondence. The pay was abysmal, the work tedious. It was a job for a graduate student, not a woman who had until recently worn Chanel to lunch. Amelia took it without a second thought. The archives were a quiet, dusty sanctuary. Her world shrank to the smell of aging paper, the soft scratch of her pencil, and the intricate loops of 500-year-old Italian script. Her job was to catalog, cross-reference, and translate letters looking for mentions of art commissions or transactions. It was painstaking, methodical work that forced her to focus on something other than the gaping wound in her life. For months, her life consisted of the subway ride to Manhattan, 8 hours in the hushed silence of the archives, and the subway ride back to her empty apartment. She slowly rebuilt a routine. She stopped thinking about what Julian was doing, who he was with. The shame began to recede, replaced by a quiet, fierce pride in her work. She rediscovered the passion Julian had tried to extinguish. He had called her love for art a quaint little hobby. Here in the archives, it was her lifeline. One rainy afternoon, she was working on a particularly dense bundle of letters from a Florentine banker. Everyone else had dismissed them as dry financial records. But Amelia's intuition, the one Dr. Finch had praised, kicked in. She noticed a recurring symbol watermarked on the paper, one she didn't recognize. She also noticed that certain phrases seemingly about wool and dye shipments were repeated with odd, unnatural frequency. It was a code. She spent the next 3 weeks of her own time, late nights in her tiny apartment, surrounded by history books and cryptography primers, trying to crack it. Finally, she did. The letters weren't about textiles. They were a hidden ledger detailing the secret patronage of a reclusive sculptor, a contemporary of Donatello, who was thought to have produced only a handful of works. These letters detailed the locations of 3 lost bronze statues' masterpieces no one knew existed. She knew what she had found was monumental. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was a discovery that could rewrite a chapter of art history and be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. For the first time in a long time, Amelia felt a surge of power. It wasn't Julian's power borrowed and temporary. It was hers, earned. She typed up her findings into a formal report, her hands trembling slightly. She had a choice. She could give this to the museum, where it would be absorbed by the institution, and she would get a footnote in an academic journal. Or she could do something else. Something bolder. She thought of Julian's dismissive laugh. A quaint little hobby. She began researching the world's most powerful and discreet art collectors. Men who operated outside the traditional auction houses, who valued secrecy and, above all, a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. One name kept appearing whispered in articles and forums with a kind of reverence and fear: Damien Blackwood. Damien Blackwood was less a man and more a myth in the worlds of finance and art. His firm Sterling Global was a leviathan with interests in everything from renewable energy to satellite technology. He was notoriously private, a ghost who moved between his homes in London, Tokyo, and New York. But his one known obsession was art, specifically lost or disputed pieces from the Italian Renaissance. He didn't just collect, he hunted. Getting to a man like Damien Blackwood was next to impossible. He was insulated by layers of assistants, lawyers, and security. Amelia spent a week trying to find a way in, hitting one dead end after another. Then she found a name in an old art world directory: Harrison Vance, the curator of the Blackwood collection. He was giving a lecture at the Frick Collection in 2 days. Amelia used the last of her savings to buy a simple but elegant navy blue dress from a consignment shop. She spent hours on her hair and makeup, not trying to look like the woman Julian had styled, but like a serious, confident professional. She looked in the mirror and saw for the first time in a year a glimmer of the woman she used to be, but stronger, her eyes holding a new steely resolve. At the lecture, she listened intently, waiting for the Q&A. When it came, she didn't ask a question. She made a statement. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice clear and steady in the silent hall. "Your point about the influence of Medici banking practices on the patronage of minor sculptors is fascinating. However, it overlooks the coded ledgers used by bankers like the Bardi family to conceal transactions for politically sensitive artists, a practice which has led to a significant underestimation of the oeuvres of masters like Niccolò de Conti." A murmur went through the audience. Harrison Vance, a portly man with a perpetually skeptical expression, peered at her over his glasses. "That is a rather bold and unsubstantiated theory. Miss Sterling," she said, using her mother's maiden name for the first time. "A clean break. Amelia Sterling. And I have the substantiation." After the lecture, Vance cornered her, his skepticism warring with his professional curiosity. Amelia gave him nothing but a single tantalizing page of her translated notes. "This is part of a larger discovery," she said calmly. "I believe it will be of specific interest to Mr. Blackwood. If he wishes to see the rest, he can contact me directly." She gave him her card, a simple one she'd had printed that morning with just her name, email, and number. Then she walked away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was the biggest gamble of her life. For 2 days there was nothing. Amelia began to despair, the brief surge of confidence draining away, leaving the familiar dregs of doubt. Then on the 3rd day, an unknown number flashed on her phone. The voice on the other end was deep, calm, and radiated an authority that needed no introduction. "Ms. Sterling, this is Damien Blackwood. Mr. Vance has shown me your appetizer. It's intriguing. I'm at my penthouse at 15 Central Park West. Be here in 1 hour." The line went dead. An hour later, a private elevator opened directly into an apartment that was less a home and more a private museum, floating above the city. The walls were lined with masterpieces, a Rothko here, a de Kooning there. And standing by a floor-to-ceiling window looking out over Central Park was Damien Blackwood. He was nothing like Julian. Where Julian was all polished, preening charm, Blackwood was stillness and intensity. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes so piercingly intelligent they seemed to see right through her. He was dressed simply in dark trousers and a gray cashmere sweater, but he wore an aura of power more potent than any designer suit. "You claim to have found 3 lost bronzes," he said, his voice quiet but commanding. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I have," Amelia said, matching his directness. She opened her briefcase and laid her complete, meticulously researched report on a massive oak table. The coded correspondence of Giovanni Bardi. It provides triangulation for locations in a Florentine monastery, a private villa in Tuscany, and unbelievably a forgotten storehouse in Valletta, Malta. He spent the next hour reading his silence absolute. Amelia stood, her posture perfect, refusing to fidget or show any sign of nerves. Finally he looked up, his eyes locking with hers. "This is either the most brilliant discovery of the century," he said slowly, "or the most elaborate fraud I've ever seen." "It's not a fraud," she said. He studied her for a long moment. "I'm sending a team to Florence tonight. If the monastery location yields what you say it will, we'll discuss your compensation. If it doesn't, you will never work in the art world or any other world again. Is that clear?" "Perfectly?" Amelia replied, her voice unshakable. He nodded, a flicker of something respect perhaps in his eyes. "Tell me, Miss Sterling," he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly, "how did a woman with your talent end up cataloging dusty letters for pocket money?" Amelia met his gaze without flinching. "I was in the archives of forgotten things, Mr. Blackwood. It seems I have a talent for finding value where no one else thought to look." The 48 hours that followed were the longest of Amelia's life. She went to her job at the museum, her body on autopilot while her mind was thousands of miles away in a Florentine monastery. She expected Blackwood's men to be discreet, but she knew the art world was a small, gossipy place. If this was real, word would eventually get out. If it was a failure, her humiliation would be absolute. The call came at 4:00 a.m. New York time. It was Damien Blackwood again. "The bronze is there, Ms. Sterling," he said, and for the first time Amelia could hear a trace of excitement in his voice. "A depiction of David Post's sleigh. It's magnificent. My team is securing it now. Congratulations." Relief washed over Amelia so powerfully her knees went weak. "Thank you. I'm in London. My jet will be at Teterboro Airport at 9:00 a.m. to bring you here. We need to plan the acquisition of the other 2 pieces immediately, and we need to do it before this news breaks. Pack a bag. You won't be going back to your apartment in Queens for a while." Her life changed in the span of a single phone call. The world of Damien Blackwood was one of quiet, limitless efficiency. A black car was waiting for her. The private jet was a Gulfstream G650, its interior more like a luxury hotel suite than an aircraft. When she landed in London, another car whisked her to a magnificent townhouse overlooking Regent's Park. Damien was there along with a team of art historians, security experts, and lawyers, and Amelia was at the center of it all. Damien didn't treat her like an employee. He treated her like a colleague, a fellow strategist. He listened to her insights, deferred to her knowledge of the period, and valued her opinion. For Amelia, who had spent 5 years being told her thoughts were secondary, it was intoxicating. She blossomed under the respect he showed her. Over the next few weeks, they were a whirlwind of activity. They traveled to Tuscany, where under the guise of a historical survey they located the second statue in the cellar of a dilapidated villa. The final piece in Malta was the most difficult, requiring a delicate negotiation with the government, a negotiation Damien handled with masterful diplomacy, crediting Amelia's research as the key to the breakthrough. In that time, a bond formed between them that went beyond their professional collaboration. They shared late-night dinners in Rome, discussing everything from Renaissance politics to their own pasts. Amelia found herself opening up to him in a way she never had with Julian. She told him about her quiet upbringing, her love for history, and eventually about her marriage. She explained it clinically, factually, focusing on the way Julian had tried to erase her passion and her personality. Damien listened, his intense gaze never leaving her face. "He wasn't polishing you," he said, when she finished, his voice dangerously soft. "He was trying to varnish over something he knew he could never possess. Your mind." He was a fool. He began to see the woman Julian had tried to hide. He saw her brilliance, her resilience, and a deep, quiet strength. The professional respect between them slowly, organically deepened into something more. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a gradual meeting of minds and souls built on a foundation of shared passion and mutual admiration. One evening, after the successful acquisition of the final statue, they stood on the balcony of his suite at the Hôtel de Paris in Monaco, looking out at the glittering harbor. The art world was now in an uproar over the Blackwood bronzes, and Amelia Sterling was the mysterious name credited with the discovery. "You've given me something priceless," Amelia, Damien said, turning to her. "The statues are magnificent," she agreed. "I wasn't talking about the statues," he said. He reached out his hand, gently touching her cheek. "You've reminded me that true value is rarely on the surface. What do you want, Amelia?" "As your compensation. Name your price." Amelia thought for a moment. She could ask for a sum of money that would make her independently wealthy for life. But she realized that wasn't what she wanted. What she wanted was to never be powerless again. "I don't want a finder's fee," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I want a position. I want to be your chief acquisitions advisor and head of provenance for Sterling Global. I want to build a real career on my own terms." A slow smile spread across Damien's face. It transformed his severe features, making him breathtakingly handsome. "Done," he said. "But I have a counteroffer." He stepped closer, his presence filling her senses. "I'd also like to offer you the position of the woman by my side, at dinner tomorrow night, and perhaps the night after that." Amelia's heart soared. "I accept," she whispered. Meanwhile, back in New York, the news of the Blackwood bronzes was the talk of the town. Julian Thorne, now a full partner at his firm, read the articles in the Wall Street Journal with a collector's envy. He saw the name Amelia Sterling and felt a brief passing curiosity about the brilliant new art historian who had mesmerized the world's most elusive billionaire. The name meant nothing to him. His ex-wife, the mousy, forgettable Amelia, had long since faded from his memory, presumably living some drab, insignificant life back in Ohio. He had no idea the ghost of his past was about to become the architect of his future. 6 months passed. Amelia was no longer the woman who had shivered on a Manhattan sidewalk. She was Amelia Sterling, a respected and formidable figure in the international art scene. Dressed in bespoke suits and elegant gowns, she moved with an effortless confidence through the auction houses of Sotheby's and Christie's, her opinion capable of adding millions to the value of a painting. Her relationship with Damien had deepened into a profound love. He was her partner in every sense of the word, a man who celebrated her intelligence and championed her ambition. The culmination of her work was to be the unveiling of the 3 Blackwood bronzes at a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the most anticipated social event of the year. The entire upper echelon of New York society would be there, captains of industry, old money scions, and the new titans of finance, including Julian and Veronica Thorne. Julian's firm had been seeking a partnership with Sterling Global for months. Damien's company was looking to acquire a portfolio of distressed tech assets, and Julian's firm held the key to the deal. It was the transaction that would elevate Julian from a mere partner to a legend at his company. He had been trying for weeks to get a meeting with the reclusive Damien Blackwood, to no avail. The gala was his chance to finally corner the man. Amelia felt a tremor of anxiety as she prepared for the evening. She would be seeing Julian for the first time since he had thrown her out. "Are you ready for this?" Damien asked, coming up behind her as she stood before the mirror in their penthouse. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown that shimmered under the light, her neck adorned with a simple but breathtaking diamond necklace, a gift from him. "I am," she said, her voice more certain than she felt. "He's a part of my past, a past you helped me escape." "He is," Damien said, his voice hardening slightly. "And tonight he will learn that the past is never as far away as we think." They arrived at the Met to a frenzy of flashbulbs. Damien Blackwood's first public appearance with a woman on his arm was major news. They swept through the grand hall, Damien's hand resting possessively on the small of Amelia's back. Julian and his new fiancée, the Boston heiress, were holding court near the entrance to the main exhibition hall. He looked smug and prosperous, the picture of success. His mother, Veronica, stood beside him, her gaze sweeping the room with haughty disapproval. Julian saw Damien Blackwood enter and immediately began to move towards him, a practiced, charming smile fixed on his face. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Julian Thorne. I've been—" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had fallen on the woman at Blackwood's side. The smile froze on his face, replaced by a look of utter slack-jawed disbelief. It was Amelia. But it couldn't be. This woman was poised, radiant, exuding a confidence and power that was utterly foreign to him. The mousy girl from Ohio was gone. In her place was a goddess. Amelia. The name was a choked whisper. Amelia met his gaze, her expression perfectly, coolly neutral. "Hello, Julian," she said, her voice even and calm. Veronica Thorne's face paled, then flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this? What are you doing here?" Before Amelia could reply, Damien spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "She is here with me." He turned his full attention to Julian, his eyes as cold as a winter sea. "So you're Thorne. My head of acquisitions, Ms. Sterling, has been advising me on your firm's proposal." The blood drained from Julian's face. Ms. Sterling. Amelia Sterling, the brilliant art historian, was his ex-wife, the one he had discarded. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The woman whose opinion held the fate of his career-making deal was the same woman he had thrown out in the rain. "Your head of acquisitions?" he stammered, looking from Amelia's calm face to Damien's thunderous one. "Indeed," Damien said smoothly. "Amelia is one of my most trusted advisors. Her eye for value and for forgery is unparalleled. She has concerns about your portfolio. She finds some of your asset valuations to be overly optimistic. Bordering on fraudulent, in fact." Amelia allowed herself a small, icy smile. "You always did have a tendency to overpromise, Julian." The carefully constructed world of Julian Thorne shattered in that moment. Every head in their vicinity had turned. The whispers started spreading through the gala like wildfire. The humiliation was palpable, a thick, choking cloud. He had called her his greatest failed project, and now his entire future depended on her. He looked at her, at the woman he had so carelessly broken, and for the first time he didn't see a project or a possession. He saw a queen, and he realized with a sickening certainty that throwing her away was the single greatest mistake of his entire life. The fallout from the gala was immediate and catastrophic for Julian. The whispers about his connection to the now famous Amelia Sterling, coupled with Damien Blackwood's public dismissal, sent shockwaves through his firm. The Sterling Global deal was dead on arrival. His partners, smelling blood in the water, began to circle. His carefully crafted reputation was in tatters. Desperate, Julian started trying to contact Amelia. He sent flowers which were returned. He sent pleading emails which went unanswered. He even had the audacity to show up at the Sterling Global headquarters only to be politely but firmly removed by security. His desperation culminated in an ambush. He found out which restaurant Amelia and Damien favored for quiet lunches, Le Bernardin, and waited for them. He cornered Amelia as she was leaving, Damien having been held back by a phone call. "Amelia, please, you have to talk to me," he begged, his voice raw. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic pleading tone. "You've ruined me." "I did nothing, Julian," Amelia said, her voice cold. "Your own actions led you here. You built your life on a foundation of lies and cruelty. Sooner or later it was bound to collapse." "It was my mother," he blurted out, his eyes wild. "She was the one who pushed me. She said you weren't good enough, that you were holding me back. I was weak. I listened to her. But I loved you, Leah. I swear I did." Amelia just stared at him, unmoved by the crocodile tears. The man before her was a stranger, a weak, hollow shell. But his mention of his mother sparked something else. A loose thread from the past. Veronica had always been obsessed with bloodlines and legacy. She had once made a cruel comment about Amelia's own family, calling them anonymous Ohio dirt. Amelia's parents had died in a car crash when she was a teenager, and she knew little about her father's side of the family, other than that he had been a painter who had given up his art to support them. That night, driven by a sudden, inexplicable curiosity, Amelia went into the box of belongings she'd taken from the brownstone. At the bottom was a small leather-bound journal of her father's, filled with sketches and notes. She'd never been able to bring herself to read it. The grief was too raw. Now she opened it. The sketches were brilliant, filled with a raw, chaotic energy. But it was the notes that made her stop breathing. He wrote of his youth in New York in the 1970s, of running with the abstract expressionist crowd, of a rivalry with a young upcoming Jean-Michel Basquiat. And he wrote of his real name. He had changed it when he moved to Ohio to escape something. His birth name was Alexander Sterling, the same last name Amelia had instinctively adopted. Her hands shaking, she began a frantic online search. Alexander Sterling was not a famous artist. He was a ghost, a myth, a brilliant painter who had produced a handful of masterpieces in his early 20s and then vanished, completely presumed dead. His few authenticated works were considered priceless, held in the private collections of the world's wealthiest people. Experts had lamented for decades about the lost Sterling legacy. He hadn't vanished. He had run away to Ohio, fallen in love with her mother, and hidden his genius to live a simple life. The journal was the key. It contained sketches of his lost works, details of his techniques, and letters that would prove his identity beyond any doubt. And then came the final twist, the one that made the floor drop out from beneath her. In the back of the journal, tucked into a hidden sleeve, was a legal document. It was a deed of trust established by her father's estranged family, a wealthy old New York family who had disowned him for becoming an artist. The trust had been set up to mature on his 60th birthday, or upon confirmation of his death. The assets it contained were staggering: a portfolio of blue-chip stocks, real estate in Manhattan, and the complete untouched collection of all the paintings Alexander Sterling had created before he disappeared. The collection was stored in a private, climate-controlled vault in Geneva. Amelia was not just the daughter of a forgotten painter. She was the sole heir to a fortune that dwarfed Julian's and potentially even rivaled a portion of Damien's. She was the owner of a collection of art that would make her a global powerhouse in her own right. Veronica Thorne hadn't just pushed her son to discard a girl from Ohio. She had unknowingly cast out the heiress to the legendary Sterling legacy, a name far more powerful and respected in the circles she cared about than her own. The irony was so profound it was almost comical. Amelia looked at the documents, then looked at her reflection in the dark window of the penthouse. The journey was complete. She had started with nothing, found power through her own intellect with Damien's help, and now she had discovered a legacy that was hers, and hers alone. She didn't need Damien's wealth or protection. She was his equal in every way. The final confrontation with Julian wouldn't be as Damien Blackwood's bride. It would be as Amelia Sterling, master of her own destiny. The final unraveling of Julian Thorne was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, grinding erosion. The weeks following the Met Gala were a masterclass in social and financial collapse. The Sterling Global deal, once his crowning achievement, had vaporized, taking with it the confidence of his partners and investors. His name, once a synonym for Midas-like success, was now whispered with a mixture of pity and contempt in the exclusive clubs and restaurants where he had once been king. He was a cautionary tale told over glasses of vintage port. He began selling his assets not out of strategy, but out of sheer bleeding necessity. The Hamptons estate went first, then the collection of rare Richard Mille watches, and finally the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. Each sale was a public stripping of his identity, a dismantling of the facade he had spent his life constructing. His heiress fiancée, seeing the financial storm on the horizon and the social stain of his connection to the ascendant Amelia Sterling, had quietly and unceremoniously returned his ring via a courier. He was left with his cavernous, empty brownstone, a mountain of debt, and a single remaining asset of significant value, a painting he'd acquired, at the height of his power, a mid-sized abstract by Willem de Kooning. It was his last claim to the world. He had lost his final bastion of perceived sophistication and wealth. It was this painting that Amelia chose as the stage for their final act. She didn't approach him directly. That would have been too simple, too merciful. Instead, she operated through layers of influence, a ghost pulling strings from a world he could no longer access. She had a trusted associate, a distinguished silver-haired art consultant named Marcus Adler, reach out to Sotheby's. Adler, a man Julian had once tried and failed to impress, informed the auction house that his anonymous high-net-worth client had a keen interest in acquiring a de Kooning from that specific period, and was willing to bypass the auction process for a private sale provided the piece was right. The bait was set. Sotheby's, eager to broker such a lucrative deal, immediately contacted Julian. To Julian, the inquiry felt like a divine intervention, a lifeline thrown into the abyss. An anonymous European buyer, he was told. The price they were floating was more than enough to silence his most aggressive creditors and give him a chance to start again. He clung to this hope with the desperation of a drowning man. On the day of the viewing, Julian spent an hour he didn't have on his appearance. He wore his last good suit, a Brioni, that now hung slightly loose on his frame, a testament to sleepless nights and a diet of anxiety. He walked into the grand Sotheby's building on York Avenue, forcing a confident stride, nodding at the staff who now looked at him with a polite, clinical distance. He was no longer a major player, he was just a seller, another man parting with his treasures. He was escorted to a private viewing room on the upper floor. These rooms were designed for discretion and comfort, with soft gray walls, hushed lighting, and expensive leather chairs. On a single starkly lit easel in the center of the room stood his de Kooning, its chaotic beauty a stark contrast to the sterile environment. He waited, his heart hammering against his ribs, rehearsing his pitch, his story of the painting's provenance. The door opened. Julian turned, his most charming professional smile already forming on his lips, and then it froze, cracking like thin ice. It was Amelia. She stood there alone, a vision of calm, collected power in a simple, impeccably tailored black dress. She looked not at him, but at the painting, her expression one of intense professional scrutiny. For a full 10 seconds she said nothing, letting the silence stretch and thicken with his shock. His mind raced, cycling through a dozen impossible scenarios. Was she here to gloat, to torment him? Or, his desperate heart foolishly wondered, was she here to save him, to buy his painting as an act of pity? A final, merciful gesture, Amelia. He finally managed, his voice a dry rasp. What is this? What are you doing here? Due diligence, she said, her voice cool and even as she finally turned her gaze from the painting to him. I'm the potential buyer. Or rather, I was. The last flicker of hope in Julian's chest died instantly, replaced by a cold dread. This was not a rescue. This was a reckoning. You... He stammered the word, catching in his throat. How could you possibly... I have my own resources now, Julian, she said, cutting through his disbelief. She took a step towards the painting, running a finger near the edge of the canvas without touching it. I always thought there was something wrong with this piece, even when it was hanging in our dining room. The brushwork in the lower left quadrant. It's too controlled. The impasto is hesitant. It bothered me, but of course my opinion didn't matter back then, did it? It was just another of my quaint little hobbies. She walked over to a sleek mahogany table and picked up a thick leather-bound folder. She opened it, revealing dozens of pages of graphs, microscopic images, and dense technical reports. I had it analyzed before I agreed to this meeting. X-ray fluorescence pigment analysis, infrared reflectography. The titanium white pigment used in the base layer contains rutile, which de Kooning didn't start using consistently until 3 years after this piece was supposedly created. The signature is flawless to the naked eye, but under magnification you can see the microscopic tremors of a forger, not the fluid confidence of a master. She looked up at him, her eyes clear and sharp, devoid of any emotion but a clinical certainty. It's a masterful forgery, Julian, a brilliant fake. It's aesthetically pleasing, but financially and historically it's worthless. She let the file fall shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. It's just like the life you built. And it's just like the portfolio of inflated assets you tried to sell to Sterling Global. The blood drained from Julian's face. The painting wasn't just his last financial hope. It was his last connection to his former glory, a symbol of his supposed taste and acumen. To learn it was a fake, a lie, was to be told his entire judgment, his entire identity was fraudulent. No, he whispered, shaking his head in denial. That's impossible. It was vetted by the best. The best can be fooled, Amelia countered, her voice relentless. Especially when the buyer wants so badly to believe in the fantasy. She took a step closer to him, and for the first time he could see the fire in her eyes. This wasn't just about a painting. This was about 5 years of his life he had stolen from her. That's what you do, isn't it, Julian? You sell fantasies. You sold one to your partners, your clients, and you sold one to me. The fantasy that you were a man of substance. The fantasy that our marriage was a partnership. But it was all a forgery. He finally broke. The carefully constructed dam of his pride crumbled, and a wave of pathetic desperation poured out. Please, Leah, he begged, using the old pet name, a violation that made her flinch. Don't do this. You've won. You have everything. Blackwood, the money, the fame. You've ruined me. Isn't that enough? This isn't about revenge, she said, her voice dropping to an intense, quiet register. This is about truth. Something you've never understood. You think my life is about Damien. You think my power is borrowed from him. That's the same mistake you made 5 years ago. You thought you could give me value, and therefore you thought you could take it away. He saw an opening, a chance to appeal to the woman he thought he knew. I loved you, he said, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. I did. I was a fool, pressured by my mother, by my ambitions. But what we had was real. Amelia laughed. It wasn't a sound of humor, but of pure crystalline irony. What we had was a lie, Julian. And you want to talk about your mother? Let's talk about her. Let's talk about legacy and bloodlines, the things she valued above all else. She walked over to a discreet panel on the wall and pressed a button. A large screen descended silently from the ceiling. With a tap on her phone, an image appeared on the screen. It was a painting, a work of breathtaking power and beauty, an abstract explosion of color, rage, and life that made the fake de Kooning on the easel look like a child's drawing. Julian stared at it, confused. What is this? This, Amelia said, her voice ringing with a pride and power he had never heard before, is the Phoenix #1. The first in a series of lost masterpieces. My father's work. She swiped on her phone, and the image was replaced by a digital version of a catalog. On the cover was the same painting, and beneath it the text, Alexander Sterling, The Lost Collection. an exhibition curated by Amelia Sterling. Julian read the name, his mind struggling to connect the dots. Sterling? That's your name now. It was always my name, she declared, her voice resonating with the weight of generations. It was my father's birth name. He changed it when he left New York to escape the art world, to escape a family that didn't understand him. He was a myth, a ghost who experts thought had died in the 80s. But he didn't. He fell in love, moved to Ohio, and raised a daughter. She brought up another slide, a financial valuation report from a Swiss bank. The numbers so large they seemed unreal. Your mother was so obsessed with my background, with my anonymous family. She pushed you to discard me for a woman with a proper lineage. Well, Julian, my father's name, the Sterling name, carries a legacy in this city, in the world she so desperately wants to impress, that makes the Thorne name look like a footnote. I am the sole heir to his entire collection, to his estate, a fortune that makes your life's work look like a rounding error. The full catastrophic truth finally crashed down on Julian Thorne. The scale of his mistake was so immense, so cosmically stupid, that it defied comprehension. He had stood on a mountain of diamonds and complained he didn't have a view. He had held the winning lottery ticket in his hand and thrown it into the fire because he didn't like the color of the paper. He had thrown away a woman he deemed worthless, only to discover she was in every conceivable way priceless. He sank into one of the leather chairs, his body unable to support the weight of his failure. He looked at Amelia, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a possession or a project, but as the formidable, self-possessed woman she was, and he felt a sense of loss so profound it was a physical ache in his chest. Amelia delivered the final devastating blow, her voice devoid of hatred, speaking only a simple, hard truth. You once stood in our doorway and called me your greatest failed project. You were wrong. You were never my creator. You were my cage. Escaping you, rediscovering myself, finding my own legacy, that was my greatest project. And it has been an unqualified success. She turned and walked towards the door, her posture erect, her step sure and steady. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. There was nothing left in that room for her but ghosts and a worthless painting. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the city. Damien was waiting for her, leaning against his car, not with an ounce of impatience, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew her worth. He searched her face and saw not the strain of battle, but the serene calm of a war finally won. He simply opened the car door for her. As she slid into the seat, he got in beside her. "Where to, Ms. Sterling?" he asked, his voice filled with a deep well of love and respect. Amelia looked out the window at the city that had once cast her out. It was her city now. She was no longer just the billionaire's bride. She was the Sterling legacy. She was a founder, a curator, a force in her own right. And she was a woman in love with a man who saw all of it and cherished her for it. "Let's go home," she said, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time that day. "We have an exhibition to plan." Amelia Sterling's story isn't just about marrying a billionaire. It's a powerful testament to the fact that our true value is never determined by who we are with, but by who we are. It's about rediscovering the passion and strength that lies dormant within us, waiting for the chance to ignite. Julian saw her as a reflection of his own ambition. But Damien, and more importantly Amelia herself, saw her for the brilliant, resilient woman she always was. Her journey from a rain-slicked sidewalk left with nothing to the pinnacle of the art world shows us that the most spectacular comebacks are not funded by money, but forged in the fires of our own self-worth and determination. If Amelia's journey from heartbreak to triumph resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of second chances, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own inner strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of resilience and redemption. Thank you for listening.